Okay, so first of all, thank you for the conditions document. I received that yesterday evening, so I think we can use that as our agenda, if you like, for the conditions roundtable session tomorrow. I did also receive an email with a section 106 attached, but it had become corrupted.
No.
So could I ask that to be sent again, please?
You got so close.
Okay.
Oh dear.
So I'll review that this evening,
Yes.
and then I'll just have comments ready at hand to then discuss during the course of the roundtable session. Site visit. Have you decided on a walking route yet, or is that in progress?
It's being finalised. I think I'd have missed that. We were told it's being finalised this morning. Is that right? Yes. Thanks a lot. Lovely.
Okay. Obviously, I'll just do that before I go, basically, so at some point this morning. Thank you. Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to raise? No. Okay, then Mr. Bell and Simon.
Thank you very much, sir. So our last witness is Mr. Bell. He's got a proof of evidence that you'll want, no doubt, to have handy. We'll have a core document number, which I'll just get if it would help. 112. There we go. Yes, CD 112 is Mr. Bell's proof. So I'll introduce you, Mr. Bell, with reference to page 3 of your proof of evidence, where you tell us that you're Oliver Bell, you're a chartered town planner, you're a member of the RTPI. You set out your qualifications there. You have 13 years, more than 13 years professional experience as a planner, chartered member of the RTPI. You're currently a director at Nexus Planning, where you've been since its outset 10 years ago, and before that you worked at Guildford Borough Council and Woking Borough Council and the development management teams at those authorities.
Yeah.
Righto, Mr. Bell. So rather than asking you to read any of your proof out or indeed your summary out, if it's convenient to the inspector, what we'll do is I'll just ask Mr. Bell for his comments on the key issues as they bubbled up over the last couple of days, for your views on those things, Mr. Bell, if that's all right. So we'll go through the key headline points really, and don't feel, as I say, as if you take your proof as read. And I'll start, if I can, with asking you to reflect on what you've heard of the council's case so far. You're the last witness. You've heard everything now that the inspector's going to hear. When it comes to Mrs. Cook's planning evidence given yesterday and the day before, are there points of agreement that you would now note that you perhaps hadn't noted before? Are there any ways in which you feel like the cases between us and the local authority are sort of coming together and narrowing?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I do. I think I've got a list of items which I think are kind of either new areas of agreement that have been established through the inquiry or just key areas of agreement. I thought it'd be useful kind of just to run through those as a bit of an aid memoir, really. So the first point is that it's been agreed that the development plan is substantially out of date, prepared in a different era decades ago. And the consequence of that is that the basis upon which the Greenbelt and countryside boundaries are defined are completely out of date, and in the instance of Billericay, have not been fully reviewed since 1989. Looking ahead, the new local plan is a long way off. By the council's local development scheme, they say it's at least 5 years, and it's agreed with the council that no weight can be afforded to that new local plan in accordance with paragraph 48 of the framework. Furthermore, in terms of looking in the context of the new local plan, Mrs. Cook conceded in her cross-examination that it is inevitable that Greenbelt release will be required to meet future development needs beyond the urban area, as there's simply nowhere else to go. It's agreed that the housing delivery test is at only 41%, and it was accepted that that is very substantially below the housing delivery test requirement. In terms of housing land supply shortfall, that's been agreed from the outset, and that is severe, reconfirmed in the recent Statement of Common Ground addendum, ID1. In terms of the site itself, it's agreed that the site is suitable, available and achievable, as confirmed within the council's HELA. It's also agreed that the site is in a highly sustainable location, as confirmed in the Statement of Common Ground, and in an appropriate location for growth in general terms. In a key point that's changed through the cross-examination of Mrs. Cook, it is now agreed that all land within the Greenbelt comprises PDL, with the remainder of the appeal site being located within the urban area. And on that basis, it was also agreed with Mrs. Cook that the appeal site is sequentially preferable over Greenbelt sites. In a further narrowing of the matters between the two parties, it's now agreed that very substantial weight should be given to affordable housing above the policy compliant level, as I understand it from the council's position. Although I still contend, in agreement with Mr. Stacey, that very substantial weight should be given to the offer as a whole. Consequence of the entire site within the Greenbelt being PDL, it's now agreed that paragraph 149G is engaged, and that for you, sir, if you were to find less than substantial harm to openness arises, and Mrs. Cook accepted that the tilted balance is engaged, and in that scenario, the appeal scheme should be allowed. And if you were to find substantial harm to openness arises, then the appeal scheme falls to be considered as obviously under paragraph 148. So that covers the areas of agreement. In terms of the sort of key areas of disagreement, of course, in terms of Greenbelt purposes, we have purpose B in terms of merging of settlements. The evidence, as you heard of Mr. Crawford, says no harm, to which I agree with. The council take a different view, but in any event, they only say limited harm. In respect of purpose B, encroachment, Mr. Crawford says that there would be some minor harm, which I agree.
Was purpose C encroachment?
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Purpose C encroachment. Mr. Crawford says minor harm, which I agree with, but the council allege a greater level of harm. In terms of openness, the council's case is somewhat varied. The two polar opposites, we have limited harm from the evidence of Ms. Bevan to substantial harm from the evidence of Mrs. Cook, and they stand by the point that this harm is exacerbated by design. Of course, Mr. Crawford concludes moderate harm, to which I agree with. It's just the two other points, main points to highlight disagreement, I think are weight to market housing. I say very substantial weight, council says substantial. And there's another just detailed point on weight in biodiversity net gain. Council contend limited weight, whereas I say substantial weight. I think that sort of hopefully gives a good summary of where I see we are.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that summary of where we're at behind us, I want to start, please, with asking you about the development plan. And I asked Mrs. Cook some questions yesterday about the original development plan, the plan from which some policies were saved, which is to say the 1998 local plan, which the inspectors got at core document 176. Could I ask you, please, about just for your reflections on that plan and the context that it sets for planning in Basildon?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, we've heard a lot about this plan, obviously being adopted in 1998, only addresses needs until 2001. I mean, it's certainly in my experience, it's one of the oldest plans that I've ever come across. You know, I work across the entirety of England, and clearly we've had an absence of a plan-led system for 21 years, which I find quite staggering. I mean, that clearly has been discussed, that flies in the face of the framework insofar as paragraph 33 and the PPG in terms of requirement reviews at least every 5 years. And in particular, there should be reviews in less than that, where housing need has changed significantly. And in the cross-examination of Mrs. Cook, she accepted that had arisen in the context of Basildon. So it is a significantly old plan, probably one of the oldest in the country, and it is devoid of any up-to-date strategy to meet current development needs.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's an old plan, that's the starting point, but still we've got to consider, don't we, following the approach at section 38.6, the extent to which allowing the appeal and granting planning permission would accord with the adopted development plan, and the saved policies from that local plan are the adopted development plan. So can I have your headline evidence as to the extent to which granting permission and allowing the appeal would or would not accord with the plan read as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. So it might be useful just to draw up I'll take up the statement of common ground, which is CD 109, just simply as the, and it's paragraph 5.3, page 10 of my hard copy. Yes. And just for reference, so that lists out the agreed development plan policies, which are of relevance to the determination of the appeal scheme. And you will note that there are only 4 policies which are of relevance. And I think that's just gives you a good example of the plan that we're dealing with here in terms of the limited number of policies that have been saved, which remain applicable to this day.
And one of them is crime prevention.
Indeed, yeah.
Which is hardly, not exactly a sort of an issue that's been much discussed at the inquiry.
Right, indeed.
Okay.
So if I just take you through each of those policies in turn and give you my view, that it's set out in my proof, but I'll give a summary of that. So the first policy is BAS GB1, and you'll see that there that is titled the definition of a greenbelt. My reading of that policy is that, as per the title, it merely defines a greenbelt boundaries. It provides no guidance as to how a decision maker should individually assess planning applications. And I thought what would be helpful, just to kind of further reinforce that position, was that if we take up the original Basildon local plan, which I think was CD 176, I think it is at the top of my head.
It is that. It's what CD 176 is the original plan.
And when you do that, so if you turn to PDF page 34.
Paginated page 29, PDF page 34. We find GB2.
Correct, yes. And that's titled Development in the Greenbelt. And this policy is, to my mind, very much it's a development management policy. It tells you what to do if you are proposing development in the Greenbelt, and sets out the circumstances which development should be refused or allowed. Of course, that policy hasn't been saved because it obviously wasn't deemed to be consistent with the MPPF. So we have a sort of a bit of a vacuum there. The plan is silent in respect of what happens in a development management scenario. So my view is that the policy GB1 merely defines the boundaries, but we're now in a situation whereby the development plan then relies upon the MPPF, the framework, to actually direct you as to how you assess applications such as the appeal scheme within the Greenbelt. And it's on that basis that I find there is no conflict with GB1 itself. It's noted as of some relevance, obviously in the statement of common ground, and I note that Mrs. Cook identifies it as relevance, but she doesn't identify any conflict. There's no conflict identified in reason for refusal 1 either.
So that's GB1, definition of the Greenbelt. The next of the relevant policies is S5, affordable housing.
Yes, so I think this should be a fairly straightforward one. We've had this as agreed as common ground that there is compliance with this policy. S5 itself requires 15 to 30% affordable housing, but the council subsequently adopted a planning obligation strategy, and it's agreed that significant weight can be given to that, and that requires a 36% requirement for affordable housing. But as you'll know, sir, the appeal scheme in fact exceeds that requirement and provides 45% affordable housing. The tenure split, that's been agreed and negotiated through Section 106, which of course will be subject to a discussion tomorrow. But overall, it's confirmed and agreed that there is compliance with that policy. In fact, we exceed it.
So we've done the first two. What do you have to say then about BE12, the policy that deals with development control?
Yeah, BE12, so that's the only policy, development plan policy, which is referenced in the council's reason for refusal. And BE12, I mean, we can turn it up if that's helpful.
I think it might just be worth turning up. Just get the reference.
I think it's CD09 as he's saved.
Yes.
Slightly unusual. I think it's the first time we've opened this.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It is an odd one. Yeah, it's good to remember what the plan actually says from time to time.
I'm there. You know when it opens up where you last were on the document.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
There we are.
So policy reads that planning permission for new residential development, alterations, extensions, etc., will be refused if it causes material harm in any of the following ways, and it lists 5 different criteria to be assessed against. Now, I should start by saying that at paragraph 6.56 of the Statement of Common Ground, it's agreed that the appeal scheme complies with criteria 2 to criteria 5. So the only alleged conflict on the council's part is harm to the character of the surrounding area, including the street scene.
Right.
Now, in respect to that, we have the evidence of Mr. Crawford, who concludes that there are no landscape character or visual impacts upon beyond site level, and overall he concludes that there is compliance with BE12. And then Mr. Pullen also concludes that the appeal scheme would enhance local character. If you want a reference for that one in particular, that's paragraph 2.16 of CD 114.
So on the basis of their evidence, and I should have asked you, but to what extent are you adopting the evidence of Mr. Crawford and Mr. Pullen, and to what extent are you departing or giving your own take, if you like, on what they say?
Yeah, I've reviewed their evidence, and I completely agree with the conclusions that they've made.
So on that footing, what do you say about the extent of accordance or not with BE 12.1?
I conclude that we accord with BE 12 part 1, and therefore the policy as a whole, and agree with the evidence of both Mr. Pullen and Mr. Crawford.
Let me ask you just a couple more questions to drill down into that a little. The inspector's got, so you've given your planning evidence on the basis of the evidence of Mr. Crawford and Mr. Pullen, as you've explained. Maybe no surprises because they're part of your team. The inspector, though, has to resolve some areas of dispute, of conflict between, say, Mr. Crawford on the one hand on character and appearance, Ms. Bevan on the other. He's got Mr. Crawford's approach that was explained yesterday, and he's got Ms. Bevan's approach that I asked her about, I think, the day before. Do you have any reflections on how he should, or how you would, go about giving weight to those assessments based on the way that they were put together?
Yes, I mean, I think this follows sort of similar points we might come on to in terms of the assessment on Greenbelt as well. Mr. Crawford has identified a very clear methodical approach. He's had regard to established guidance, GLIVIA. He's a qualified landscape architect. So I think he's undertaken a very clear and transparent approach in terms of how he's come to his conclusions. I think on the contrary, on the council's side, it's really just a personal judgment with some somewhat vague assertions. So to my mind, in terms of, I would be offering significantly greater weight to the conclusions of Mr. Crawford as opposed to that of Ms. Bevan.
Now, on there's this area of dispute, BE 12.1. The final policy, the secure by design policy, as I understand it, there's agreed accordance with that policy. Yes. So when we look at the 4 policies as a whole, if you like, which are agreed to be relevant, the development plan policies that are agreed to be relevant, really the issue, so far as the reason for refusal goes, seems to turn on this BE 12.1 that you've identified. You've said you think we accord with it. Okay, fine. But what if the inspector disagrees? What would be your view then? Let's say that the inspector finds that there's conflict, that he accepts Ms. Bevan's evidence and decides that I think there'd be material harm to the area, etc., within the meaning of BE 12.1. I find conflict with BE 12.1, right? In that world, what is your view on the extent to which allowing the appeal scheme would accord or not with the development plan read as a whole?
Well, the scenario we'd have here is that there would be an alleged conflict, or you were to find conflict with one criteria of 5 of one policy of the entire development plan. And in my view, the nature of that conflict is not sufficient to find the scheme would not be in compliance with the overall thrust of the development plan as a whole. And I have referenced in, and turn up the reference I have included the Rochdale judgment, I think in terms of as a reference to that, which effectively just acknowledges that there are pushes and pulls within a development plan.
Policies can pull in different directions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I can give you the reference if you want. That's there. I just need to find that myself. I think it is, yes. So it is. Well, the judgment is CD 121.
Okay.
And it's paragraph 49, 48 and 49. Okay,
thank you. It's well-trodden stuff. I mean, I don't think there's anything controversial about it. The idea is that individual policies may push or pull in one direction or another, but you've got to reach a view on the accordance with the plan as a whole. All right, then, fine. So that's your evidence on that. Now, so you say then in the end that there is accordance with the statutory development plan, but of course we don't stop there. Whether we accord with the plan or even if we don't accord with the plan, we have to go on under section 38.6 to consider a range of other material considerations, including, of course, the MPPF that we'll come to. So I want to ask you about some of those and your view on the critical ones and how they bear on this decision as to whether or not to grant planning permission. Could we start with the need for market housing? The inspector's seen now, I think, a number of the detailed numbers, but what are your reflections on the context in Basildon and the weight that he should be attributing to that element of the appeal scheme?
Yeah, okay, great. I won't sort of repeat it. We've obviously discussed at length in terms of the age of the plan and the fact of how inconsistent it is with current national policy. I just think I would add there that there has been a radical shift instigated through the framework in terms of boosting the supply of housing. That's covered under, I think it's paragraph 5.14 of my brief in terms of the changes and key paragraphs, in particular, obviously paragraph 60 in terms of significantly boosting supply of homes, and paragraph 68 in terms of requiring a 5-year deliverable supply. We've already talked about that there is an agreed severe and acute shortfall, that's ID1, on housing land supply. And of course, the housing delivery test is very substantially below the requirement. I note, and this is referenced in the housing land supply evidence, it's the 7th worst in the country. That's all the sort of current situations. Just looking back, the other thing to factor in is that what's the solution to this terrible situation we find ourselves in? And of course, in a Greenbelt authority, you'd hope that would be a local plan, a plan-led system. But as we've talked about multiple times, that hasn't been adopted, a new local development scheme as of yet, and at best it's 5 years away. I mean, in my experience, local development schemes tend to be an aspiration and don't tend to be achieved. And I know it's already been highlighted some of the delays and challenges that Basildon have found with their recently withdrawn plan. So my view is that, having regard to the constraints across the borough, supply is only going to worsen in the short term, and there is no plan-led solution that is going to arrive in the short and even in the medium term. So I think when you sort of combine all those factors together, I think it's very difficult to imagine a particularly more severe combination of factors really in relation to supply. And it's on that basis that I offer very substantial weight to the benefits of housing delivery, market housing delivery. And as a point of reference, that aligns with the Colney Heath decision, which has been referenced a few times and referenced a number of times in my proof of evidence. The relevant paragraph there is 49 of CD 127. I think just a point to note there is that the inspector found a grave situation and afforded very substantial weight to market housing. But in that instance, there were better supply figures than are indicated in Basildon, and at least in part, a slightly clearer emerging plan position.
And also in Colney Heath, are you aware of whether that site was PDL or Greenfield?
It was, as my understanding, it was a virgin greenfield site.
And had it ever been proposed by either Welland Hatfield or St Albans for allocation?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Just one point, just for completeness, you mentioned that that you referred to there being an agreed severe and acute shortfall. I think you referred to ID1 as being the housing statement of common ground. I think that line, that quote, actually comes from 6.45 of the main statement of common ground, the original one, and that, just for the inspector's note, is Core Doc 109, page 17, 6.45. That's the reference to a severe and acute shortfall that I think you were giving earlier on.
Yeah.
Okie dokie. So that's market housing. Thank you very much. Now, affordable housing then. To state the obvious, the inspector's heard it all now at some length from Mr. Stacey. So really, just you're kind of wrapping up conclusions on where you stand now. We've been through all the numbers, been through the detail. What do you say and why?
Yeah, as you say, we're there's very little between us now. Agreed very substantial weight to the provision above the policy requirement level. It's just a difference of that we consider it's very substantial weight to the offer as a whole. Really here I rely upon the evidence of Mr. Stacey. He's obviously portrayed an absolutely dire affordable housing position here. But I think the key point here is that you have a dire situation, but on top of that, we are materially exceeding what the policy compliant level of affordable housing provision is to provide 45%. And I think that's a key distinction. And I think that those two factors combined mean that it is appropriate to offer very substantial weight to the entire offer. And again, without wanting to repeat references, there were similarly acute references, and then Mr. Stacey references in terms of acute affordable housing positions, both Colney Heath and also the Oxford Brookes Wheatley campus decision, where very substantial weight was given to the affordable housing offer. I note that quantums were different, but as I think was debated yesterday, there is the situation is so dire that you can't underestimate the weight should be given to every single affordable house that is provided within Basildon.
So that's the overall approach you take to market housing, then to affordable housing. Could I then have your reflections on the relevance of the position that the parties have reached on the sites, or the Greenbelt part of the site status as PDL, as brownfield land? So what does that tell us in terms of the approach we're to take in national policy?
Yeah, sure. So if the relevant paragraphs are 119 and 120 of the NPPF, and that emphasises the importance of making effective use of previously developed land to meet the need for homes, as I'm sure you'll be well aware. And I think the point is that this can be, that emphasis can be no truer on Greenbelt sites, particularly now what's agreed to be a previously developed Greenbelt site, because if we don't make effective use of sites like this, then that's just going to lead to pressure on other Greenbelt sites and potentially other greenfield Greenbelt sites. Now, in terms of the weight that should be given to the effective use of PDL, if we just start with the Greenbelt element, or the extent of PDL within the Greenbelt, it's paragraph, I think relevance is paragraph 120D. I don't know if you want to turn that up, we can do.
So MPPF Core Doc 3, page 35.
And that obviously starts planning policies and decisions should. And D is talked about promoting and supporting the development of underutilised land and buildings, especially if this would help meet identified need for housing where supply is constrained. and available sites could be used more effectively. I couldn't think of a better example in terms of the appeal site being able to fulfil that provision.
Mhm.
And in terms of the weight that I think should be afforded to that, I would draw your attention to, and it's just referenced in my proof of evidence, there is an appeal decision, just called the Olney appeal. It's CD 142. And that in that instance, paragraph 14, the inspector gave significant weight to the use of PDL beyond the settlement boundary. And I see no reason to take a different approach here.
Okay.
Do you want me to touch on the urban area PDL?
Yes. So what you've done is you give significant weight to the effective use of PDL in the green belt.
Yes.
And then there's an element of our site which is not in the green belt but is within the urban area.
Yes.
So what do you say about that element of the site?
Yeah. So if we just turn back to the MPPF. And it's 120C, and this is where it states that planning decisions should give substantial weight to the value of using suitable brownfield land within settlements for homes and other identified needs. So I appreciate it's about 9% is agreed of the appeal sites within the urban area. So I appreciate that doesn't apply to the entire appeal sites, but nevertheless, I follow the guidance of the MPPF in terms of giving substantial weight to the use of that part of the site.
Okay, thank you very much. Now,
you're saying that's a higher weight than the greenbelt PDL.
Yes, insofar as
just to clarify.
Yes, I am.
If you think that substantials are sort of rung up from significant,
that's what I make sure. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Right. Now, can we turn on then to ask you some questions about greenbelt issues? You've talked a bit already about the inevitability of greenbelt release. You talked about the vintage of the greenbelt boundaries. We've been over all of that. You've talked about the agreement that 149G is engaged in the MPPF. I wondered if I could ask you to go into that in a little bit more detail and just try and clarify the way that you see that paragraph working, and your views on how the inspector should approach 149G. And then I'll ask you about impact on greenbelt purposes. But if we start with 149G.
Okay. Is it worth it if we just turn up 149G?
Yes, please. So it's page 44.
Yeah. So that obviously relates to the, in part, the complete redevelopment of previously developed land, and it's got two limbs to it. And I'm looking at the second limb, which is not to cause substantial harm to the openness of the greenbelt, where development would reuse previously developed land. And this is in a greenbelt context, and as we discussed, that is agreed with the council, so we meet that requirement. And secondly, where it would contribute to meeting an identified affordable housing need within an area of a local planning authority, again, it is agreed that we meet that criteria. So we trigger 149G. So then really it just comes down to whether or not we cause substantial harm to openness of the greenbelt. And I should be clear that 149G doesn't talk about also the purposes. It's only asking the decision maker to assess the impact on openness.
Could I ask your view on that threshold of substantial harm? 149G, there are two bullet points. The first of the bullet points that we're not seeking to rely on talks about greater impact on openness. And then it's the second one that talks about substantial harm to openness. These adjectives, as I say, get bandied around a lot of planning inquiries like this. Where on a spectrum do you put substantial harm compared to, significant harm or other words that you might want to use? How high a bar does it set in your view?
Yeah, I think it sets a very high bar. It's in terms of the scales that we tend to talk about in planning in terms of harms or benefits. substantial. We obviously talked about very substantial in terms of some benefits. It's pretty much, the very sort of highest bar that you can reach. And I know that was, I've referenced an appeal decision in my proof whereby an inspector notes that to cause substantial harm is actually a high bar, i.e. it's quite difficult to achieve. And that's, to my mind, is a deliberate intent of the government within the framework, acknowledging the substantial benefits that can be given through one, using previously developed land, and two, delivering affordable housing need as well.
Which is what 149G's about, at least that second bullet.
Yeah.
And if we're thinking about this bar, which you say is a high one of substantial harm to openness, what do you take? We've seen all the evidence-based documents several times now, Greenbelt studies, landscape studies, housing topic papers, there's all sorts. But what do you take away from those documents as to what they tell us about any likely effects on openness from the development of this site?
Well, in terms of the council's own published documents, the Greenbelt topic paper, that's CD 169, and the housing options paper, CD 30, I believe, both of those conclude that there would be limited harm to the openness of the Greenbelt, which to my mind is demonstrably clear that falls well below the threshold of substantial harm.
You've talked about Mr. Crawford's evidence and reflecting on that, and his conclusions were at the site level there'd be moderate impacts on openness, with which again you've said you agree.
Yes.
So just to be absolutely clear as crystal about it, assuming that if that's the right answer, if the inspector goes along with Mr. Crawford's approach, don't know whether he will or not, how does that conclusion sit against what 149G's after?
My view is that moderate harm would fall comfortably below the threshold of substantial harm. So it would pass 149G, and therefore it would fall into category of appropriate development, if that's the right term, within the Greenbelt. And so therefore I think that even if you disagree, say, with the conclusions of Mr. Crawford at moderate harm, you would have to go all the way up to whatever's higher significant. You'd have to go all the way up to substantial to obviously then find that there was a conflict with that policy.
Now, that said, Mrs. Cook does go that high. She says, as we heard yesterday, it would be not just moderate, not just significant, but substantial. So the inspector's faced with another quandary where you've got witnesses there's a conflict of views on this. You've got what Mr. Crawford said, you've got what Mrs. Bevan said, you've got what these various documents you've referred to have said, then you've got what Mrs. Cook says, and he's got to resolve this issue one way or the other. A similar question to the one I asked you about character and appearance, but how would you advise him to go about that exercise in terms of giving weight to the assessments which have been done and reflecting on the ways those assessments have been compiled?
Yeah, I think it's probably pretty much the same answer as was provided in respect of the assessment of landscape harms. The assessment that Mr. Crawford has undertaken has been methodical. He set out a table in terms of his assessment of harms, how he categorises those. So I feel that it's a very clear and evidence-based approach which stands up to scrutiny, which of course is what these types of evidence-based documents need to do. Conversely, I think the evidence of Mrs. Cook is again, it's vague, it's unsubstantiated assertions in terms of how a substantial level of harm is going to be inflicted upon the openness of the Greenbelt. And on that basis, I again would be given significantly greater weight to the conclusions of Mr. Crawford.
Just to be clear on this, if in the end the inspector decides anything less than substantial harm, so it might be significant or moderate or whatever, but anything less, then what is the agreed consequence of that finding on the outcome of this appeal, in your understanding?
Through the cross-examination of Mrs. Cook, my understanding was that she accepted, therefore, that the tilted balance expressed at 11D of the framework would be engaged, and that planning permission should be granted, which I agree with.
So let's turn away from that question, and I'll just ask you very briefly, as I say, because we've heard the detail from Mr. Crawford. We've had lots of detail on purposes, but just very briefly for your reflections as the planner, on what you've heard on purposes and also, I suppose, on character and appearance as well. Is there anything you'd like to add to the debate on those things, adopting as you do all the evidence of Mr. Crawford?
I think that, yeah, I'll keep it brief. I mean, I think the point on merging is just that, yes, there is a difference between the two parties, and I do rely upon the conclusions evidence of Mr. Crawford. But ultimately here, the council are only alleging a limited harm, even on their own case, to the impact upon purpose B.
And anything more to say on purpose C?
I think on purpose C, it repeat what I've already said before. Basically, is that I agree with the conclusions of Mr. Crawford in terms of minor harm, and for the reasons I've outlined before, I consider that his approach to identifying what that level of harm is stands up to much more scrutiny, and therefore I afford it more weight.
And so far as the general approach to character and appearance goes, anything more to add on that?
Insofar as the alleged on greenbelt impacts, do you mean?
No, moving out of the greenbelt into
right.
more general sort of character and appearance of the countryside issues,
okay,
on which Mr. Crawford gave his evidence. We've heard, as so you rely on what he said on the conclusions.
Yes.
Anything to add so far as what those conclusions mean in terms of planning policy?
Yeah, that is, I mean, there are obviously alleged conflicts with the framework in terms of impact on landscape character, etc. That is covered within the evidence of Mr. Crawford, as we've heard. He concludes that there is compliance with the framework in that regard, in particular, I think it's paragraphs 130, which I completely agree with, and I find no conflict with the framework in that respect.
Now, before I ask you for just your final comments on the overall approach to the balance, then the balancing exercises the inspector has to undertake, one last question of detail. On your list of matters not agreed, you mentioned biodiversity net gain, something I asked Mrs. Cook a couple of questions about. Could you just summarise why you're at where you're at on the approach to BNG in terms of the weight afforded to it and what you say about the council's position?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, just to recap, so it was agreed yesterday that there is no local plan policy in place relating to biodiversity net gain. So therefore, it falls to the MPPF to guide us as to what to do. Paragraph 179B talks about measurable gains, and we talked, and it was discussed with Mrs. Cook yesterday insofar as what does a measurable gain mean. In short, as long as there is, whether it's 1%, etc., as long as that is achieved, that is a measurable gain. However, in this instance, as you'll see, so in the condition discussion we'll have tomorrow, condition 5, as it's worded at the moment, requires a submission of a biodiversity enhancement strategy that commits the appellant to include a 10% biodiversity net gain. So to my mind, that materially exceeds the requirements of national policy at this present point in time. Of course, there's the Environment Act, which is coming into fray, but that's not mandatory at the moment. So there is that doesn't bind at the moment insofar as a requirement on a legal requirement to achieve 10%. So in terms of the weight that should be given to that, to my mind, that is a material increase over and above what national policy requires. So I cannot accept Mrs. Cook's conclusions on limited weight. I conclude substantial weight, and the reason for doing that principally is falling in line with an appeal decision, which I reference within my evidence. It's the Minister on C appeal, CD 171. And that's paragraph 53, which delivered a gain of 10%, or at least 10% as well.
Right. Thank you very much. So we've been through the statutory development plan, given your views on that. We've been through not everything, but the key material, other material considerations. You've given your views on how those should be weighed. So bringing it all together then, could you walk the inspector through how you suggest the overall planning balance should work in a case like this, where there's more than one test at play, so it's not altogether perhaps as simple as maybe other cases might be, as to the right way of getting there. What's the decision-making tree look like so far as you're concerned?
Okay, yeah, well, if we just start with section 38.6, obviously, so far as applications determined in accordance with the development plan, taken as a whole unless material considerations indicate otherwise. I've obviously outlined already, but I consider that the appeal scheme complies with the development plan taken as a whole. But material considerations are particularly important in this instance because of the out-of-date nature of the local plan. And really the most important question in the context of the agreed position on the site being PDL within the green belt is whether or not it comprises inappropriate development within the green belt. That would therefore, so in terms of it being PDL, agreed as PDL, that would mean that we'd engage paragraph 149G of the MPPF. I've obviously gone through and outlined that if you were to find less than substantial harm to openness, then we're in a scenario whereby the MPPF does not conclude that development should be restricted or refused within such designations. And as Mrs. Cook accepted, that means that the tilted balance expressed at 11D is engaged, and on that basis planning permission should then be granted unless the harms clearly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits.
Which they don't, the council accept. So
Correct.
that's one way of doing it. If you like, assuming that assumes that the inspectors with you and Mr. Crawford on that the harm to openness being less than substantial, that takes us through 149 to 11D2, the tilted balance. That's one way. But okay, so let's go back to that key decision about harm to openness. What if the inspector reflects on the evidence and decides no, the harm to openness will be substantial or more? What happens then? Where does that take him?
Yeah, okay. Clearly, if it's substantial harm, we're into the realms of inappropriate development and para 148 territory, which in essence, the test is whether the benefits clearly outweigh the harm to greenbelt and any other harms. So it's a balancing exercise here. So if I just take you through my view insofar as a canter through in terms of just the harms and the benefits there, we have, as per the MPPF directs us to give substantial weight to the definitional harm through inappropriate development. In terms of the green belt, other harms to the green belt, I have a view of that there is no conflict with purpose B. Even on the council's own case, they only allege that there is limited harm. We accept that there is minor harm to purpose C, encroachment, that's limited to the appeal site. Council alleged that it's greater harm. On the openness, as I've said, I agree with the evidence of Mr. Crawford that it's moderate harm to openness. And overall, see the MPPF directs that you give substantial weight to those harms. In terms of other harms, the only other harm identified is a moderate, as through the evidence of Mr. Crawford, is a moderate minor adverse effect on landscape character of the appeal site. So that's kind of the harms. If we then now turn to the benefits, which of course have to clearly outweigh the harms. So as a canter through, we've got the use of a built-up area for housing, which I give substantial weight to. The use of PDL within the green belt, which I give significant weight to. The delivery of market housing, which I give substantial weight to. Very substantial, important distinction. Affordable housing, which I give very substantial weight to. Economic benefits, which I haven't touched on, that's covered in my proof, which I give significant weight to, in line with paragraph 81 of the framework. And then finally, I give substantial weight to biodiversity net gain. So taking all of these benefits together, I conclude that the appeal scheme clearly outweighs the harm to the green belt and the other identified landscape harm. And on that basis, planning permission should be granted.
Thank you very much indeed. So those are the questions in chief.
Okay, one question for me, because it's a bit I'm still slightly struggling with how to frame. So I'm just in your thoughts on this detailed design, how that relates to policy BE12 and the putative reason for refusal.
My view is that the appeal scheme does not. We've assessed the design of the scheme as to whether or not it is. I'll just get getting up the word in as to whether or not it is compatible with the character of the surrounding area and street scene. So my view, based on the evidence of Mr. Pullen, who kind of deals with the detailed design aspect, he actually concludes that the appeal scheme would enhance local character. So on that basis, yeah, I find it complies in that regard.
What about the putative reason for refusal? You want to just, have you got that?
Sorry, I haven't got that.
Might just be worth turning that up and just getting your reflections.
Yes, almost maybe a hypothetical question of if you were to find harm, how you feel that fits into the overall assessment.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, this would be if we're to find harm against that policy, then obviously it would need to be material harm. But I think that there's been a lot of discussion about the contained nature of the site, and my view is that any potential weight that might be given to that, I think, would be in the realms of kind of more as a limited sort of minor adverse effect and weight. And to my view, that wouldn't come close to outweighing the benefits that I've identified. And you'd still be in the territory of obviously being the 148 test of the benefits overall would clearly outweigh that harm.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. Atkinson.
Summarised. And before then, turning to what I rather blandly call a route to judgment, a decision tree. Spend a bit of time on that. But dealing then with the weight, the different weight which is given to the various benefits, and starting with the economic benefits, we're not a long way apart. Mrs. Cook says, in her evidence, that she gives limited weight to this, and you say it's substantial weight.
I think I say significant weight. Unless I'm mistaken.
I noted significant.
Mrs. Cook, what she does she acknowledges the employment opportunities during the construction phase. It seems to me for that basis she limited. As I understand, what you say is that the additional weight that's significant is because of the household spending, additional household expenditure. It's your group of 595.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right, is it?
It's a combination of all those factors, but I conclude that it should be significant weight.
You see that I'm making a distinction between the employment benefits of the construction houses versus the ones there.
Yeah, the operational sort of phase, as it were. Yeah.
And in respect of the second aspect, the additional household expenditure, you rely on the material produced by the HPF extended from the ground, essentially.
Yes.
Which is necessarily generic, isn't it?
Yes.
It's broad analysis some years ago of estimated expenditure.
It is, but in my experience, it's a well-trodden path and accepted way of calculating economic benefits associated with a development.
Yeah, but it's not tied. Of course, it's impossible to know, is it, what additional expenditure for people who come to live in these houses would be, and whether indeed it's additional, whether they're already lived in the area.
Of course, we are. This is looking into the future, so there can be no 100% certainty on this. But when you're looking into the future, the best thing you can do is to look at statistics of what's happened previously, and that's obviously what's been done here by using the ONS data to look at trends and likely expenditure.
It's reasonable to say that given the extent of the shortfall, there's a local need, people who doesn't want houses. It's possible, isn't it, that in fact the additional household wouldn't be additional to the local area because people are already living locally who want to buy a house.
Potentially people may well be moving, but it's still there would be still never it's difficult to tell, but there could well be people who are moving from external areas and coming into Billericay. That still would be nevertheless new investment which will be coming into Billericay and potential benefits to Basildon as a whole. Now, I think I should just add there that I know Mrs. Cook accepts this, but it was obviously agreed in the statement of common ground that this should carry considerable weight.
I understand, yes, no, I mean, she explains initially that she was resigning from the previous position. Dealing then next with BNG, as it's now being called, biodiversity navigation. You refer in your proof 5.6, 5.11. You start with a reference to policy 179B, which urges net gains, and that's a plan making policy.
Sorry, I'll just turn it on so I have the.
So 179.
Yes, it does. It refers to plans, correct? Yeah, but it sets out the context, obviously, in terms of what this is all in the context of a plan-led system and having up-to-date plans. So this is what the government expects that plans should be doing.
Yeah, and then you descend into the decision management, which is the reference to paragraph 180A, which sets out there. It is negatively worded, isn't it? If the harm from biodiversity can't be avoided or mitigated or compensated for, then permission should be refused.
Yes, but only if all of those various categories are not satisfied.
And I'm taking, but let me see if this is right, that the condition 5, which is proposed now, is by way of compensation.
It's a combination of there's an enhancement strategy, which will deliver a number of on-site enhancements to the site, but there will still need to be a requirement for an off-site contribution to achieve the total 10% net gain.
Of these, within the text of 180A, says to mitigate or to compensate for it.
Well, the condition, if it was only securing a net, a marginal net gain, then it would just be, or just a neutral, it would just be it would just be mitigating the effects of the development. You get back to the sort of same level as you were before development started. But that's not what the policy, the condition is requiring. It's requiring a 10% requirement, so which of course we would have to comply with for planning permission to be granted.
Yeah,
so it's going above, it's over and above, it's an enhancement.
It's over and above mitigation, over and above compensation, or is it?
Yes, well, obviously there's different views on what compensation would be, but to my mind, the baseline would be a compensation is you give back, a harm that has occurred, you compensate directly for that in a comparable way, but we're going above and beyond.
Yeah. So you are compensating. What do you say again beyond that?
Well, we go beyond. We do. If you want to cut it down into sections, we compensate. We mitigate the impact. But then on top of it, we offer material enhancements that exceed national policy.
And by offering the condition, I mean, all conditions are accepted, aren't they, to make otherwise unacceptable development acceptable. And this performs that function.
Yes, it provides the council with a certainty and security that benefit will be delivered. And indeed, it would, if the inspector's minded to allow him appeal, it would give him that certainty.
And if the condition weren't offered, you would be in breach with the of 180.
Well, we could still commit to do that, but it's about obviously the certainty that can be offered in terms of mitigating those harms.
Yeah, but is that right? If you weren't offered, you would be in breach of this national policy. Is that right?
Well, we can't, because we can't deliver a net gain on site. So yes, there is a requirement for the off-site improvements. So, but yes, that condition is necessary. It meets the tests in our view to make the development acceptable.
Yeah. So on that basis, I think this is Mrs. Cook's point. It's required to make the development acceptable, which is a good thing, of course. But it can't therefore be given more weight than simply performing its function to make the development acceptable. So,
but if the condition, if it was worded to say a 1% net gain, then that would be required to make the development acceptable, and that would still achieve what national policy requires.
so the basis for the weight you give it is the 10%. That's where
yes, correct.
Comes from.
Yes, correct. And I draw reference to, as I said in my evidence in chief, I draw reference to that appeal decision as a way of consistency to weight.
Yeah, the point there was the point you were making about that appeal was that it was offside, not on site.
Yeah, it was it was a comparable. It was at least 10% was to be provided, and it was secured by condition as well. So a comparable basis, is from my understanding.
Very well. Affordable housing, where we're nearly there. Mrs. Cook gives substantial weight to this on the basis of the acknowledged council's severe need, and also because 45% offered is over and above the policy requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And yesterday we accepted a very substantial rate for those additional 7 units, which are between 30% and 45%.
Yep.
So we're not that far apart. As I understand Mrs. Cook's position as well, yes, that's great, but the overall numbers are small, and the acute shortage is reflected in the substantial weight which she gives, but it's not justified to go beyond that because of the relatively small number involved. So that's a reasonable approach.
I understand that is her approach, but I, like Mr. Stacey, take a different view on that. I don't think that we should be making our decision on weight just based on the number of affordable units that are to be provided here. Mr. Stacey's evidence was very clear at the dire affordable housing position here and the desperation of residents to be able to get affordable housing. And therefore, I don't think we can underestimate the weight that should be given to every single affordable unit that is being delivered.
Yeah, so you focus on the percentage, not on the actual numbers. Similar issues in market, again, Mrs. Cook accepts market housing substantial weight must be given to the provision this case. But again, because of the overall numbers being low, no more justification. Again, that's reasonable stance.
Again, I think it's a similar point here. I understand that is her position, but as I've outlined in my evidence, I found it difficult to imagine a kind of a more severe set of circumstances here in terms of the failure to have an up-to-date plan to meet up-to-date development needs. And of course, there is a severe shortfall. And given the fact that I've not really come across I think it's unlikely there are many more severe situations that are in evidence at Basildon, I think it is absolutely right that we are offering the maximum weight that can be given to market housing.
And is the phrase very substantial, which you urge? So is that in your understanding, is that a term of art? Does it mean anything more than substantial?
Well, look, it's subjective, isn't it, insofar as what somebody interprets, the whole spectrum in terms of what it means to an individual. As we've discussed, substantial is very much at the high end. I think the additional very is a reflection of the acute and severe situation that prevails in Basildon, and I think that is justified. And as I said, I have drawn reference to, in particular, the Colney Heath appeal decision, where very substantial weight was offered. And in that instance, I noted that the housing land supply position was more favourable than we do find in Basildon.
So, yeah, I mean, is it, in some sense, it's a sort of grade inflation developed recently like GCSE? It's a phrase which has begun to crop up.
It has, indeed. Yes, in specialists, correct. Yes,
but it doesn't. It's no definition for it. But
no, of course.
It's becoming part of the currency.
It is, and indeed, and maybe that's a reflection of some of the severe situations we find in local authorities at the moment.
All right. Now, I'd like to start now with my roots to judgment. And let's see if we agree on it. Okay, so in respect of the green belt part of the site, which is 91%. The first question, it seems to me, is whether or not that green belt land is EDL in its entirety.
I don't believe that's a question now.
Well, let me just.
Okay.
It's agreed, obviously, between. It's a judgment still for the inspectors.
Yes, correct.
He has to make that judgment. Of course. I don't withdraw from what Mrs. Cook said, but it remains for the inspectors.
Yes.
If you have a look at the site, and the relevance of that is primarily because it brings into play potentially paragraph 149G.
Yes.
And we're agreed in the first part of the section, subsection G, that we're talking about complete redevelopment, assuming that the inspectors found that it's PDL, previously developed land. And we're into the second limb, aren't we? That's the relevant one.
Yes.
So the inspector then has to make a judgment on the extent of harm to the evidence. He has to do that anyway.
Yes.
But particularly it's urged by this policy. And what he has to assess in this context is whether the harm to the evidence is substantial. Again, obviously, that's that's a judgment for him. But we're agreed, just been through, that is would contribute to the kind of full pass rate, so we don't need to worry.
Yes.
It's really just turning on this test. Would the proposal cause substantial harm? Now, if he finds that redevelopment does cause substantial harm to the evidence, then the proposal is inappropriate.
Yes.
And in those circumstances, he would have to go back to test of paragraph 148
Yes.
and what that
Yes. I agree.
If, however, he finds that development does not cause substantial harm to evidence of redevelopment, the corollary of that is that the building is not inappropriate.
Yes.
Now, I know you said earlier appropriate, and it'd be a lot easier if we could just the language of this part.
Yeah,
is
I accept.
No, we're told we have to say not inappropriate
Yeah,
as well,
right.
even though it's
Okay.
everyone knows.
Yeah.
It seems on.
Yeah.
Just make sentences convoluted for no reason, but unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, so in those circumstances, if he is found that the building is not inappropriate, the decision he has to take is in the usual way, by which I mean you put it in section 38.6, Parliament's development plan or other material considerations. Of course, this is an important one.
Yes, although, yeah, albeit in this instance, obviously with a material consideration, it's that we have an out-of-date local plan.
Oh, of course, that's all part of it. Yeah, I don't step away from that. All right. So the same, going the other way, going back to the beginning, inspector's gone onto the site, he steps through into the pallets, making his judgment about whether it's BDO. He accepts it as the yes. If he finds that the site is not all BDO, and he, in the event, agrees with officer's stage, then 149G doesn't apply for the whole site. It applies for the small part which is agreed is BDO.
Yes.
Okay, so for the bulk of the site then, this is in the world, in the world where it's not BDO. 148 applies again.
Yes.
So he has to weigh up in the way you just helpfully summarised harm by way of inappropriateness plus other harm plus all the other considerations, whether they amount to those special circumstances. And if, following that process of 148, he finds that he finds that other considerations do outweigh that, then he grants permission.
If they clearly outweigh the harm, then grants permission.
And
Yes.
if he finds they don't, then he
Yes.
all right, now turning then to the paragraph 14. 11, sorry. That's the framework. We're agreed that we're into plan's not up to date. We're agreed about that. And so we're into paragraph D. And that requires us, Inspector, to grant permission unless the application of policies framework take areas of assets, special areas. And we're agreed that those footnote 7 policies include greenbelt.
Yes.
So, in working through paragraph 11, the inspector, by applying the greenbelt policies in the way we've just been through, will come to a conclusion, either grant permission or refuse. But what he doesn't do, and maybe this is where we disagree, is apply policies, the greenbelt policies referred to paragraph D1. But then, if he finds that there isn't a clear reason, then move on to D2. What he's required to do for greenbelt, because greenbelt policies require in their application consideration of all aspects of the judgment, he stays within D1 and reaches a determination. He doesn't move from D1 to D2.
Yeah, I think, as you say, that's a position I think where we depart on. I don't accept that. I think it takes you go to the relevant policies. In this instance, it talks about greenbelt, and you go to paragraph 149G, 148, whichever one the inspector goes to, and applies those policies.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but yeah, the point is, by doing that, you come to a conclusion.
Yes, you'll come
one
to.
way or another.
Yes, you'll come to a conclusion. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, for greenbelt policies, the tilted balance doesn't apply because it's all dealt with within D1.
No, I don't accept that. If take, for example, just 149G, if it's found to be not inappropriate development, then the MPPF does not provide a clear reason for refusing the development proposed, and therefore the second limb is engaged.
Yeah, well, that's I think we seem to do. We do disagree about that. It may be a matter for submissions.
I'm so sorry. What was the matter for submission?
Whether the tilted balance applies in the greenbelt. I'm essentially saying it doesn't because it's clear that the decision is made.
I think I would add that for the purposes of 149G, obviously say it's passed, and then you return to the tilted balance, and that's applied. Our view on if we reach 148 is that obviously the test at 148 is kind of is the reverse. It's such a high bar, but basically if you achieve 148, then it's academic insofar as the tilted balance.
It may well be, but it is quite a complicated path. In this case, I thought it's important that we seek to set it out. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, thank you. Any re-examinations? Okay, in that case, thank you very much, Mr. Bell. As I said earlier in the day, can we usefully use the time? Can we do conditions now, or is that premature?
I think we probably, we can do. We can do like a short break.
Yeah, we'd have a break, I think, to make sure.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously I'll speak to council as well. Mr. Atkinson, sorry. I'm keen to use some of the time left if we can. Do you think the council will be ready to talk about conditions after a short break?
We're just investigating.
Okay.
I think we're hopeful.
Okay. even if we do most of the conditions, then come back to it slightly tomorrow as well.
Bananas, great.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
We do- Maybe if we could then take a short,
Yeah.
short break.
So we have a short break. I'll be coming to it slightly more flying than we've been on because I haven't read
Of
your
course.
document.
Would you like to take a little bit longer, sir?
Um,
20 minutes, half an hour or something, just to make
Shall we
sure
have?
we've got the time, haven't we?
Yes. Shall we have? Actually, we have a 40-minute break.
Yeah.
Because then that will mean I can actually read the document
Proper look.
that I got, and
Great.
then I'll be a bit more prepared.
Well, then hopefully.
And then we can still probably conclude by lunchtime.
Sure.
And do the site visit.
Absolutely. So on the 106, we've got solicitors coming through. I think 106 we are putting that off till tomorrow, aren't
Yeah.
we? So at least if we could do conditions, that would be using the time.
Okay. So if we break until 11:30, if that's okay with everybody, gives all time to prepare properly for it.
Right. So.
Okay. In that case, the inquiry is adjourned. Thank you.
So we've got Mr. Oliver Bell again, and we've also got Mr. Hugh James. Do you want to spoke?
So I might, yeah.
It's just loading. Yeah. I'll put this in the middle.
You have that one.
Yeah, I think it's good.
I'll put this one in the middle. It can serve both of us.
Thank you.
So, sorry, if you just spell your name, please.
Yeah, so it's HYWEL. And then to confuse you, James is the surname.
Yeah, and then so any qualifications?
Yeah, MRTPI.
And your-
MSc, first.
And your role?
Associates.
At
At
Nexus,
Nexus Planning.
same place as Mr. Bell.
Come through the conditions. Oh, they have now.
So I'm assuming you'd want to know Mrs. Van's type of qualifications.
Yes, please. Thank you. And is that MRTPI?
Yeah.
Be unusual not to as head of planning. Okay, thank you. So I was going to use the document you've helpfully put together as the basis for this, and just go through condition by condition, really. So conditions 1 and 2, there was nothing to discuss. Condition 3, I've made a small comment.
Sorry, sir. Could I just
okay.
flag? I think we've just been working through just some of the detail, and I think on condition 2, there's just one item to really discuss. Is that you'll be aware that we submitted a series of minor amendments to the scheme, and that's on CD 106. Now, there was an updated site layout and some elevation drawings, etc., which were provided. And on that updated site layout, that did, for example, include some additional tree planting on the southern boundary, you might recall, and also there's another little bit of soft landscaping, some benches within the central part of the site. We've realised that the detailed hard and soft landscaping details haven't been updated to reflect those revised proposals. So we've just been working through our thoughts on a potential solution to deal with that, basically just to marry up the inconsistencies. So that might just mean that potentially those relevant hard and soft landscaping drawings might not be listed under the approved plans, because there might be some potentially, if we agree that's the right approach, some updated drawings to replace them.
And we also have the conditions later on to do a soft and hard landscape.
Yes,
We
we do,
actually made a comment, do we need to build in flexibility to this in case things change?
Yeah, because what we're conscious of is if we've got a list of approved drawings, then obviously if we do tweak something, then you get potential inconsistency, obviously, and needing to modify then the approved drawing list. When potentially, as you say, there might be need to have some flexibility and changes on hard and soft landscaping. So just thought I'd flag that now and perhaps come back to that on the hard and soft landscaping.
Okay,
Condition.
what about the landscape master plan and the landscape management maintenance plan and soft landscape specification? Are they okay?
They do need, so the hard and soft landscaping proposals need updating, and the master plan does as well.
Yeah.
I think the maintenance plan, we're just checking now. I think there's a potentially, but I mean the specifications should obviously be linked to the proposal. So I think there might just be a need. It might be to just have a collective kind of need to update those, because they're all read together, really, aren't they?
So perhaps I think we'll come back to this when we talk about those two particular conditions later on, but it sounds like we need to remove them from this and then work out later on in this discussion how we reincorporate them most appropriately and those conditions later on.
Yes, it's effectively the last five documents listed on condition 2.
We also check that the proposed site plan is the right one as well. So the one we've got at 1760/P/01 Rev B, can we be sure that's the correct one, correct version as well? That's second.
Yeah,
second
that's the one which
That's
is
correct.
CD 106 as the latest.
that is the correct. That's the
Yes,
correct.
that one is the
that's
correct
correct.
updated one.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I think, Yeah, so let's delete those from this condition and we'll come back to how we reincorporate them later on.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So condition 3, I just ask you about them being burned on site. Then there's a comment here saying it's been recommended by environmental health. Yes, I mean, I'm happy to keep that in.
Yeah, we have no objection to that.
Okay. 4. So here, so my comments were, do we need to add a prior to commencement rider? And then also, can we double check the ecological impact assessment? And you've added the prior to commencement. And I do now have that document.
Yes.
Now, there are various aspects that are fairly detailed in that document, but then from my perspective, that's covered by part A when it says following the recommendations made within the document. And nothing in part B seems to conflict with that, unless anybody else has found any conflict. So I'm simply going to say that we can just leave this as written if both parties are happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then for condition 5, so I asked about demolition and bats, and then also talked about the trigger for part B. And then there's also the retainment element to part C. So if we just go back to what's the changes you've suggested. So you, and by you, I'm talking about collectively you really when I say you, have highlighted it does include bats. So, and then have included the demolition element of the trigger, which makes sense to me. And then there's comments from the council saying this doesn't relate to extra surveys, which I think answers the appellant's question about this.
Yeah.
And then I made a comment about can they all be retained, or are some of the measures not really for being retained? And you've agreed with that, although I'm now wondering, do we need some sort of maintenance element to the condition? Have my comments gone too far? Let's just read C again. So the strategy shall be implemented in accordance with improved details and timetable. Do we say, and where appropriate shall be retained thereafter, perhaps?
Yeah.
Because I think some elements do need to be retained and some don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we agree with that.
Okay, thank you. So condition 6, obviously I've suggested that I need more detail on this to justify it. The appellant said the same things. Perhaps I just turn to the council. So this is purely construction phase related to drainage. So as distinct from actually during operation.
Yeah, we had to remove that condition.
Okay. Thank you. So condition 7, I suggest that it include the submitted to improved in writing. Well, I didn't really, I just said what trigger should there be. So let's go back to what you've agreed on. Okay, so it's just gone to submitted to improved in writing before commencement.
Yeah, we're happy with that.
Okay, fine, thank you.
I think just to flag, so we've missed out the word in writing, I think, but otherwise, I think, yeah, the
Yeah,
principle,
I'll make sure
principle
I-
is agreed. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'll
fine.
make sure I so that's probably a good point to jump in and say, if I am allowing, then I will probably make other further small tweaks that are non-material and things like that.
Yeah, yes.
As long as we cover everything that actually has bearing, there's a material consideration to both sides today. Also, just checking, good, there's no one online. I forgot at the start to do the normal spiel about this being without prejudice to my decision, because there's nobody in the room that's not a professional planner. Nor is there online, so I can carry on. Condition 9. I asked if this fitted in better to condition 10. I think you've agreed with me, so you just deleted it.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. Condition 11, yeah, there's a couple of points where there's talking about phasing, which isn't relevant, and I think you just deleted that where it comes up. But actually, yeah, so part C to this, I think we do need to look at carefully, because I think there's 2 elements to this, and it's making sure that the triggers work properly. So let me just read again at your suggested rewording.
Yeah, that's correct.
I mean, is it almost C and D? Is it almost 2 completely separate things, or are they related to each other? So the archaeological report, I think that reads fine. So an archaeological report must be submitted to improved writing by a local planning authority. Although we need a trigger for that, or is the trigger above?
Well, I think, the triggers
just
at the start.
commencement,
So if it was to be separated, so it probably isn't a D, it's probably just a separate line at the end of the condition. Because it's not a prior to commencement requirement, is it? It's just about the timescales between the work being undertaken and the report being submitted, as I understand.
Yeah, I think you could split it, but at the same time, I think it's fine as it stands. So that 6 months applies to both parts of it.
Yeah. So I think we've tried to put the comma in the middle of it, so to try and distinguish between the triggers, whether that's entirely effective.
So submitting the information within 6 months of completion of field work. I think I'd be more comfortable with that as its own element at the end of the condition, if that's okay, because it isn't prior to commencement, that's a completely different trigger.
Yeah.
If that's okay with the council.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
It's the whole of C. So in 6 months.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's fine.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. How will the council know when the field work's complete? This is relying on communication, I suppose, between the parties.
Yes.
Okay, I think it's a relatively minor point.
Yeah, I mean, normally it would be carried out in in combination with a county archaeologist, in terms of with being aware of the investigations and timing often coming out on site. So there's normally quite a bit of dialogue that goes on anyway in that respect, in terms of the time of activities.
Okay, thank you. So 12, my comments were in relation to parts B and C. And how, if it's for compliance, it can't be prior to commencement. And then also how the part C really read more like the beginning of the condition, which is what you've done. In terms of part C. And then I think you've also adopted my comments because you've made that element, which is to do with compliance, be separate to the points A and B underneath the prior to commencement. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Tree protection plan, is that still okay, or does that need to be updated? That's fine.
I think that's all fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Why have you moved condition 13 up? Because it's prior to occupation, not commencement.
think that was with the council.
Actually, we changed the commencement to be.
Is this a bus stop one?
That was the highway authority changed that to occupation.
Are we agreed?
So I'm happy with
Yeah.
the trigger. It's just the
Yeah.
location of where it is. It shouldn't
Oh,
still
sorry.
be back where it was, because that's occupation, not commencement.
Yeah, I think the council had initially changed it to commencement. We've discussed it further
it's gone
and
back
suggested
again.
occupation,
Okay.
and I think highways have agreed that. So I think it probably, as you say, it needs to go to later on. But I think the triggers are agreed.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
Yeah.
they are. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so
So
the
just
trigger's agreed.
push
That's
down.
all. That's what matters really, because I'll probably reorder the conditions anyway.
Yeah.
if I'm allowing. Okay, thank you. So 14, 15. So on 15. Oh, the numbers are slightly different now. So on the SUDS and flood risk one, I asked a question about links to maintenance, and also if the flood risk assessment really added anything. And it seems like you've just accepted my comments and just deleted those elements.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Energy and sustainability. So I made a comment about being vague, and if there are actual requirements that need to be met and a policy basis.
We haven't got a policy on that, have we? So we can't ask for a specific amount. That's a problem. So you yeah. So we haven't. So you're reliant on the MPPF rather than an inherent. So in 1998 there wasn't this thing. I actually helped write that one. I haven't been here all that long, but I left it and then came back.
Okay, so I think it's fairly it's clearly uncontroversial in the current political climate, and given the general comments in the MPPF to have such a condition. So I think I'm quite relaxed about there not being a policy to hang it on. But then I also think it's probably right to do what you've done, which is delete references to particular elements and really just let the negotiation between the two parties work out what that is. So I think, yes, on that basis, happy as you've proposed.
There's an expectation of scheme delivery, isn't there?
The slight levels. So my comment here was, is this also to do with SUDS as well as design, or is it just design?
Just design. Yeah.
Just design. And that's to do with
So that's to do with the impact of the
Prominence.
development. Obviously,
Yeah.
we need to just control the heights. And also what we don't know is the fact that we've had a few schemes, once they've funded the SUDS, is the fact that they have actually been more elevated than we first thought. So some smaller schemes have come out higher than they should have been. So I think it's just a way of restricting sudden changes in schemes.
obviously here, particularly important Greenbelt as well, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I think we have got, B12 probably is the correct policy to use.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Then the LEMP. So I haven't reviewed the 106 because I haven't. Well, I've reviewed it at a high level, but not in detail yet. But I don't think that matters because you've agreed to take out the bit that I was going to review it against anyway, which is the funding mechanisms. Just because we don't normally expect financial elements to come into conditions. Okay, thank you. Some visibility site displays. I just thought that there was a duplication there of the trigger, and again, it looks like that the highway department happy to just delete the duplication, so that's fine. Yes, just my other question though, are we certain that the displays themselves are within either highways or?
We're content. We've checked that with our highway consultant. So yes, we're content.
And I think so that's in the highway statement of common ground
Okay,
as well, which is
okay, thank you. And then apart from updating the drawing, I just wondered if we could merge these conditions. Obviously, the council said they prefer not to. I suppose that's just something for me to take away and just make sure when I'm going through them that it makes sense in how they're set out.
Yeah, you can discharge one by one. So as long as you have to discharge them, it should be A, B, C, and D. So as long as you've got a reference point, so you can discharge 22A, 22B, 22C separately. Then you can't
Would
do
strike me
it.
as an opportunity to list them out, I think, as you seem to be suggesting. So, yeah.
No, we just meant we're happy subject to the just an A, B, C, and D, so we can discharge
Yeah.
one by one.
Yeah.
That's all we need to be able to. So
Okay.
if you submit 20A, then we can
You can partially discharge.
it,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right,
partial
yeah.
discharge. Yeah, that's the only difference we've got, and we'll make sure that they've got. If we can discharge the whole condition together, not we won't have to. If you have to break them down, that's when it gets more confusing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, whenever I'm drafting conditions, I try to remember what it's like when I was a case officer for the Strats team at RBKC. And boy, do they love a condition. Yeah. So I try to err on the side of helping the council officers as long as it's within all the rules in terms of that. Okay, condition 23. I'll say to the one. So 23 is the one that was drawn up. I did also have suggestions on changes to words. I think you agreed with my changes. It's not that I expect. I'm sure you will consult with the highway authority. It's just the way PIM's approach this. It's just to say the local planning authority, and then it's up to you who you consult with. So it's not the principle. It's just the way we approach it.
That's fine.
Thank you. The travel information pack, actually, yes. So I think let's go through this one because I don't think it's quite there yet, and I think my comments probably didn't help. So let's just read that. So prior to the occupation of the relevant dwelling, a travel information pack shall be submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. That's fine. It says this shall include the travel vouchers. Does it need to say provided to the occupants of each dwelling, or is that kind of implied by it being part of the pack that's given to each dwelling?
It said it should be each dwelling, shouldn't it? Yeah. You don't need occupy. That's just a bit. Yeah, that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you could then get somebody could then say that you could misconstrue that as every occupant gets 6.
Yes.
Yeah.
The issue
It's
is
a per
it's
dwelling
dwelling
basis.
rather than I think
Not-
Yeah.
you add occupants in there, you actually do, and then we'll get some challenge between us all. We don't want, so,
Yeah. No, quite right. No, we
yeah, I just
completely agree. It should be per unit. Yeah, per dwelling.
Okay. And then, but this doesn't have now, and I think this is my suggestions, which has confused things, is it's got a trigger to ensure that it's approved by the council, but not that it's actually given to them now. I think that needs to be reinserted. So the travel packs must be provided to each dwelling prior to occupation of relevant dwelling.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
They just say provided to each dwelling prior to occupation, something like that.
Yeah. Is it first occupation?
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to be
Otherwise
if
each
it changes
time.
hands, then you're going to have somebody coming back saying, "Where's my travel pack?"
Yeah,
I've just
yeah.
moved into flat 42 and I haven't got one yet.
Okay. Are we happy with that? Those changes?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Thank you. On the lighting scheme, I think you just agreed that the last bit was superfluous because it just required permission. Thank you. Harness of landscaping. So now we need to think about this carefully, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Shall I just set out where we
we're coming from on this, and appreciate it's the first that council and yourself will have heard of it. So I think our view was that the updated site layout within CD 106 that incorporates things like the in a simple graphic way, the additional trees, additional planting, etc. And that's where you can see those discrepancies between the technical hard and soft landscaping details. So we need to make sure that those hard and soft landscaping scheme specifications are updated to reflect that. But importantly, what we didn't want to do is create kind of any real measure to substantially deviate away from what's already been put forward and obviously accepted by the council. So what we were effectively anticipating was that there would be a submission of an updated drawings and specification, etc., which were probably, it may be referred that they're based upon the submitted information, but are updated to reflect the site, the additional landscaping measures shown on the site layout plan. If that makes sense, we need to agree a form of words to that. But it's trying to strike that balance of, well, most importantly, ensuring that the updates as per RevB site layout plan are introduced, but that we don't get to realms of a complete sort of review of the entire strategy again. I appreciate, we always, an element of flexibility is helpful, but we're not sort of seeking a complete review of the entire strategy again. It's just a case of making sort of minor adjustments.
Okay, I'm just looking now for our standard wording for landscaping from pins, whether that will help or not.
We've got a position there, but we've got a plan that shows us on site now. That's agreed. That's fine, because that's what I'm more worried about. Is there no irregularities?
No.
That's an issue. So that's fine. So we've got that. So the new strategy, I'm happy to have that.
Yeah, so our standard position is probably going more towards what you don't want, which is opening the whole thing up again.
Yeah, okay.
So we do need to agree with bespoke wording.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just really keen that we have so many challenges about loss of trees. I waste so much officer time dealing with tree loss.
Yep.
It's ridiculous. I need to be very clear that what we've got agreed is the as is position.
Yeah.
That's really important because it'll be a nightmare for us. I mean, Billericay and Wickford are the hot potatoes for tree loss, and I waste so much. I mean, if we don't know what's on site, then we can't. You'll have us on site constantly dealing with your guys. So I think that's more important to me than what the additional planting, the new form is. We're happy to have that at whatever point. Obviously, so that's fine by me.
Okay.
So what wording did you?
So I mean, the general approach was that we were thinking something about as a prior to commencement trigger that and it could be you combine or we have it separate, but basically the hard and soft landscaping schemes, it can be one conditional separate, and it would be sort of as shown on, and then we would probably list the drawing specification details that have already been submitted as a reference point, basically, to say that they shall be updated to accord with the additional landscaping features shown on the new site layout plan, and that those updated drawings shall be obviously submitted and approved in writing by the local planning authority. I appreciate it's hard to when you haven't got the words in front of you.
Yeah. Perhaps if I could ask, could you draft that and send it in to myself and the council, and then perhaps pick it up first thing tomorrow morning? Because I'd want to read it actually written on paper.
So we've got a scheme in front of us which our members and our residents have seen, and they've seen twice.
Yes,
so we can start on the schemes. What I would want to see is that you come back with a reduction in tree cover. So I think basically we've got to make sure that the scheme is no worse than submitted. So
absolutely. I think we're kind of aligned on that.
So in your wording, I think we need to say something about. It's quite difficult to word conditions like that, but I think that the situation as set out in those we can't have a. If the schemes are approved, we need to make sure that it runs smoothly, and I guarantee that anything that will not make it run smoothly, it will not run smoothly. So I think we need to make it very clear that the expectation is that the scheme will deliver high quality, soft and hard landscaping.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think hopefully with the approach we're taking of referring to what has already been considered and specifically referencing those drawings, as always, what we're saying is there should be no rowing back from what's already been committed
exactly,
there.
yeah.
You're just providing those additional elements which we committed to as part of our amendments. And hopefully that gives a tight enough kind of scope for the condition that that's all it's dealing with.
Does the council also want an element similar to the materials condition for the buildings, asking for spec on elements such as, I don't know, this pavement area near the shared surface or something, or is that unnecessary? Are we happy with the spec you've already got? Because you already got a spec, haven't you? So I suppose that's so that's already covered off the details.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm happy with that in principle, but can you please provide wording and maybe just touch on it briefly tomorrow morning?
Of course,
sure
that's
okay.
absolutely fine. Was there any, just out of interest, was there any view on having it combined, or would there be a preference of continuing to keep it separate as a hard and soft landscaping?
I'm happy to go with what the council would want.
I think for the ease of our residents who will probably pick faults with it, it's probably separate, to keep it separate.
Yes, that's fine.
They understand
we can,
hard and
that's
soft
fine.
landscaping.
That says we've drafted
That'd
it
be
already.
easier for us than to combine it.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, thank you.
Now on the electric charging points, the inspectors raised, obviously there's no policy requirements, but there is obviously national requirement for electric charging points now, isn't there? If anything, we just want to look at just passive ducting for that. So we get them in, especially for the flats, because I mean, there is a requirement, isn't there, to deliver electric charging points now on new dwelling houses.
Dwelling houses,
Yeah,
yes.
so we just ask for, I know we can't condition it because we've got policy, and the inspector is quite right there, but it is just as part of that hard landscaping approach, can we look at some sort of at least ducting for that, passive ducting, because that does improve your sustainability, your deliverability of your properties going forward.
Mm-hmm.
We have asked that from quite a few schemes going forward now, that we ask for just passive ducting. It'd just be part of the hard landscaping scheme.
So yeah, for houses, it's just building regs require it now, so that will just happen.
It's just
flats.
it's just we get it as part of your hard landscaping scheme. It's just it just inbuilt at that point. Otherwise, you end up with them.
Yeah, you don't want to come back and dig it all up again.
Yeah, that's just it. The problem is that so we do. I know we haven't got a policy to ask for it now, but we do ask for it where possible. At least just passive stuff.
Yes. Okay. That's agreed.
I don't agree with every dwelling house, but we have to, don't we? So.
Okay. But as also like something that I need to take that on board and think about that, because of the lack of policy basis and where I think it passes the tests, even though it's agreed between the two of you. But I've heard both positions. And that's
fine. We're happy to leave you to make a decision on that.
I mean, if anything, it's just as you do the hard landscaping scheme, you just include it as part of that. I mean, which we can then just.
Yeah, I think we have no objection in principle to doing that, but appreciate the inspector needs to make a judgment as to whether that meets the test.
Okay, thank you. Condition 30 looks like you just agreed to remove that. And then 31, I asked about veteran 106. You've obviously decided to keep it in. I said I haven't probably read the 106 yet, so maybe that we'd best discuss the 106 discussion tomorrow.
Yeah.
But obviously both parties are happy with the condition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to make a note to come back to that on the 106. Now, condition 32. So I asked, did you want an earlier trigger? And it looks like you don't because you kept it. But I asked that because would this not impact on design in the sense of where bin stores and things go? And therefore, does it need to be earlier than occupation and more to do with the construction phase? Or other bin stores already agreed because it's a full permission, and actually I'm overthinking this. This is more really about, you know, how things move between communal stores and how they're separated.
Yeah, it's only the flats which have the communal, obviously the properties just have their own. Yeah, the flat block has got some internal stores. On the northern side. Just trying to check the hard landscaping details for the dwellings.
Because I think in reality, the dwellings are just going to sort themselves out.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was just checking.
There'll be a way that the council collects bins, and
yeah,
it'll be the same as with any other house.
No, I was just checking if there was any details, but I agree. I mean, that's the reality. They've all got back gardens, etc. They'll just sort themselves out. So the so yeah, then for the flat block, you can see it's on the.
Perhaps needs to say that, isn't it? Because otherwise, it makes it the private occupation of the flats, a detailed.
Or I suppose the question is it just a case of, I mean, it's shown on the approved drawings already.
Yeah.
Or is it just basically B? Do you not need? Is it just that private occupation? The approved effort shall be provided before the. Yeah, it is just that, isn't it? It's just B. The approved refuse and recycling should be provided before the occupation of the development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did your highways people ask for Part A though, or environmental health, or somebody?
No, because you've done all your sweat thingy. Sweat pass analysis. We know that they can get in there. So yeah.
I think, yes, I would agree that it's just a compliance condition of just
B,
ensuring the approved details.
It's just B, isn't it? It's just basically the approved refuse and recycling store shall be provided before the occupation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Condition 33. So I asked essentially, yes, I'm not disagreeing with having the parking for disabled, obviously, but whether it's necessary because it was already covered by the plans, and it seems like you think is covered by the plans, so you've deleted it.
This is more to do with that. This is good.
But I'm thinking through whether we keep it anyway, just because it's slightly belt and braces. What would the management plan be? What needs to be managed? Are you just providing them, then they exist?
I mean, they're clearly annotated on the drawing. Yeah, I would agree. I'm not really sure what there is for us to manage on that front.
Yeah.
We should deliver it in accordance with the approved drawings and they'll be retained.
Perhaps I could add this as a rider to the hard landscape condition or something as a bullet point, just to make sure that it's captured.
Yep.
Okay. So condition 34, again, just the phasing. I think that's the only change. Yep. And then broadband, you've agreed to delete. And then 36 and 37, I thought were either duplication or covered by building regs. And again, you seem to agree. Although actually, no, Mrs. Cook, you've made a note on condition 36 that it's been requested by your internal team. So my comment though was less that it's not necessarily more that it's already been covered. So let's go back up to the relevant condition.
I think it's been covered, isn't it? I think it's covered actually.
Is it covered by the enhancement strategy? Maybe it's not. Maybe it does, because the condition 4 is just construction, isn't it? Let's make sure we get this right. So 36 is making sure that the post-construction mitigation measures are carried out. Maybe I was wrong to suggest it should be removed.
Yeah, I think it does need to, because it's a different document as well, isn't it?
Mm.
One's the biodiversity and it's actually the ecology. It's under separate legislation as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it has to stay in.
No.
The appellant happy that being retained?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
We're content with that.
Okay, but 37, as a standard rule, pins don't add that condition. We think it's building regs.
We haven't got a policy just for anyone.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Anything else anyone wants to raise in conditions?
No.
Okay, have we got submission of agreeing a site visit route?
Yes, yeah. I haven't circulated it yet, but I can do.
We've got it. We've received the question.
And I might need you to print it out for me as well.
That's
please.
fine. Yeah, sure.
Probably in, I think you might need it in colours. Is there a colour printer?
Yeah.
Great.
Yep, we can do that. Yeah.
Instead of driving as well.
That's okay. So while that's being done, so tomorrow,
Yes.
so we've obviously got section 106. I guess first thing, I should assume the lawyers are okay with 9:30 tomorrow.
I'm sure they are, yeah. 1:30, okay, for 106.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. And Cook from Essex County Council will join on Zoom. She's
Okay.
confirmed that with me this morning. Yeah, for 9:30.
Okay, thank you.
And that's it. Right, we go straight into closings.
Closings. Now, would you like more time to write them, or would you be happy to, obviously talking to both of you now, to just go straight from 106 into closings?
We'd be content, for our side, we're content to go straight on.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like we should all get home at a reasonable hour
Fingers crossed.
tomorrow then.
Fingers crossed. Famous last words. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Depends on what the closings are, doesn't it?
Okay, so yes, it looks like it's going to be heading towards roughly a half day tomorrow, which I think I'm sure we can all are happy with on a Friday. Yes, if I just need to wait for the site visit plan, and then I should be able to do it this afternoon.
What time, so do you think you're going to do the site visit? We can just so we can sort of access with the landowner.
So I'll have lunch first and then go there. So probably about 1:30 to 2.
No problem.
Thank you, sir.
I'll just keep it open until seeing it because I might have questions when I see it.
Yeah. Yeah, good idea.
Mhm. And we need to vacate properly, don't we? Take our stuff out. So I'll start doing that, even though it's a little bit unusual when the inquiry is still open. Probably have time to watch Have We Got Planning News for you. Although one of my cases is up.
Did you grant or review?
I allowed.
There you go. I'll probably be happy.
Yeah. If I allowing housing tends to make them happy.
It's a reflection for me. Yeah.
As I say to council, I don't always allow housing. I have also dismissed plenty of housing as well, but this one wasn't allowed.
Yeah.
Mr. Young was one of the,
I see.
but he's not presenting it.
That's the central beds one. I was recently in central bed on the site of Foxton, so shortly before that one. Yeah, that was interesting. It's the housing and supply was 4.97 years.
Yeah, that was tight and very relevant as well. So that was
absolutely always a central bed, which is one of those but districts where it just goes on and on and on. But yeah, we have some supply debate.
Yes, I mean there was enough.
So many appeals over the years.
Thank you. And again, so things like if this had gone into the extra day and that was just closings, I'd probably be pragmatic about that as well. Okay, so so this should be an ID dot. This is ID 6.
So the first one is a driving route, starting from here, although it doesn't show that, but it takes you past Noak Bridge up to the site and then just beyond it, just to see the rest of the settlement. Second one is the walking route with the various viewpoints. And the third one is just reference to the existing and proposed plans, just for your own benefit, so you've got those to hand.
So, yeah, so the blue dotted line is the walking route. Okay, that, let me just think this through. So presumably where it goes down the road, that's as far as the pavement goes.
Yeah, it goes up to that sign,
Onto that
road sign, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, is the appellant happy with this?
Yes, I think it's been agreed. It's been agreed, so yes.
Okay, no, this seems reasonable to meet. So yes, I will undertake this afternoon. Okay, thank you. So anything else from anybody before we adjourn?
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. The inquiry is adjourned and resume at 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you.